Welcome to Biggest Spoilars, the destination for exclusive spoilers, latest updates.
General Hospital spoilers are in for Monday, November 17, 2025. Suckers can anticipate the coming occasion to show Emma Scorpio Drake getting manhandled. Rick Lansing has a proposition for Alexis Davis. Plus, Laura Collins has a meltdown in front of cameras and journalists. Laura's public meltdown, the mayor's fury boils over when she intimately accuses a rival of lying, setting off a media disagreement that could ail her political future. Rick's risky proposition. Rick Lansing stuns Alexis with an unanticipated offer that leaves her questioning his motives and her own judgment. Emma and Gio in trouble. Britt's harsh battle with Emma and Joe's emotional concession to Brooklyn spark a chain response that could alter Rocco's fate ever. On the next General Hospital, let's launch off with Emma and Britt Westbourne. Unfortunately, Rocco Falconeri's censure didn't do veritably well. The youthful man is surely being set up. While he and the others did break into the lab, Commodity feels veritably wrong about this. Meanwhile, Emma is at the sanitarium when she runs into Britt. The croaker grabs the council pupil's arm roughly in an exercise clip. When Emma demands she get her hands off of her, Britt says not until they get many effects straight. Curtis Ashford's suggestion over in Portia Robinson's office, she meets with Curtis Ashford. It seems that Stella Henry's words might have gotten to Curtis. The man has come with a proposition. Portia asks if he's suggesting they stay together for the baby. This man needs to just make up his mind and stick with it. Gio Palmieri confesses. General Hospital spoilers for Monday, November 17 reveal that Gio Palmieri wants to confess to save Rocco. The youthful man ends up going to his birth mama, Brooklyn Quartermain. The violinist tells the brunette that he's the reason why Rocco broke into the lab. Laura Collins' public explosion. Standing in the hallway at the courthouse, Laura is girdled by cameras and journalists. Also, Laura looks at someone, presumably Ezra Boyle or indeed Professor Henry Hank Dalton. The mayor also loudly declares that the man is a fabricator as journalists film and snap prints. Lulu Spencer's plea. As for Rocco's case, Lulu Spencer turns to Carly Spencer for help. The journalist says Rocco could go to captivity if she doesn't do Commodity drastic. Read this. GH News. Kelly Monaco is eventually back. Rick Lansing's proposition. There's also an intriguing exchange between Rick Lansing and Alexis Davis. As Alexis looks suspicious, Rick says, "Perhaps you and I should do the same. Considering the hostage situation not that long ago. I'm not sure if Alexis should trust him at all." Which plot are you looking forward to seeing the most on Monday, November 17, 2025? Rocco Falconeri was framed for worse crimes, so Rick Lansing's plea deal fell piecemeal. Friday's GH occasion featured plenitude of important scenes, so it's how it all went down. At Bobby's, Stella Henry admitted to Curtis Ashford that she'd figured out Portia Robinson was pregnant. Curtis confessed they were decoupling anyway, but she pushed him to work effects out with Portia for the baby's sake. At the gallery, Trina Robinson talked to Ava about her parents' divorce before Jordan Ashford showed up with Jen Sidwell and Marco Rios. Trina led Jordan down from the others to show her some artwork for her new apartment, which led to pressure and Trina's warning. Since Curtis heeded to her, Trina claimed she'd make sure he no way went back to Jordan. Back at Bobby's, Lucas Jones told Carly Spencer and Jocelyn Jacks that he was moving in with Marco at Windmere. Carly incontinently flipped out and claimed it was Aunt passing, but Jocelyn defended Lucas' right to live his own life. After Carly blustered about Jen Sidwell and suggested Marco was using Lucas, there was further pressure. Lucas was hurt as he exited and headed to the gallery, where he hugged Ava for being so probative. As for Carly, she snapped about how she'd no way been so disappointed in Jocelyn. Carly claimed Jocelyn knew better than anyone how dangerous Sidwell could be. At one point, Sidwell also spoke to Ava about his desire for a ground to peace with Carly and perhaps indeed Sunny. Ava allowed. It might be a ground to nowhere with Carly, but she felt effects with Sunny would depend on what happened with his peers. Now that Lucas was moving in with Marco, Sidwell suggested that virtually made him family with Ava and intrigued her. At the PCPD, Rick worked out a misdemeanor deal with ADA Justine Turner, which involved Rocco getting 6 months of community service. Once Britt Westbourne returned to the police station for updates, Nathan West assured her that Rocco would probably get a poke on the wrist. As Britt and Nathan were leaving for Rocco's censure, Britt looked concerned over Professor Henry Hank Dalton entering to speak with Ada Turner. Dalton indeed possessed Justine soon after and stressed the significance of talking to her about the lab break-in before she went to court. At Sonny Corinthos' place, he tried to ease Lulu Spencer's mind about Rick's capacities as an attorney. Lulu set up herself wondering how the teens indeed settled on the idea that Dalton was doing illegal beast testing. Meanwhile, Giovanni Gio Palmieri expressed his guilt to Rocco since he was the only one in legal trouble for all this. Rocco offered consolation and eventually hugged Gio before he went to court. When Emma joined Gio latterly, he admitted he didn't know if he could live with Rocco taking all the blame. Emma claimed this was her fault, but Gio wanted to confess his part to Rocco's parents and leave her out of it. Emma argued that she'd confess too and added that they'd do it together, so Gio took her hand and smiled at her. At the courthouse, Dante Falconeri raised enterprises about the optics of Laura's presence considering she was trying to win a mayoral election, but she claimed on being there for Rocco's censure. Rocco was pleased to see Nathan, Britt, Sonny, Laura, Dante, and Lulu were each in the courtroom to support him. Marco also popped up and claimed Diane Miller wanted him to report back with news on what happened. Rick was easily feeling good about the plea deal he worked out, but Justine claimed it was off the table once court was in session. Ada Turner talked about new substantiation coming to light that refocused to Rocco destroying personal information. Plus, there were dangerous accoutrements on point that could have put lives at threat. Rick approached the judge and tried to request a holdback due to Justine's curveball, but the judge argued there'd be time to prepare between now and the trial. Since Dalton no way mentioned Rocco destroying anything during his earlier sweepstakes with Laura, she knew this was a frame-up. Sonny also conceded this was suspicious and ultimately glared at Justine. The judge set Rocco's bail hail for 2 days from now and claimed he'd be remanded into guardianship until also. Rocco shocked and had a courtroom outburst, but Rick, Lulu, and Dante settled him down. Nathan also offered Rocco consolation as he was hauled off in bind. Eventually, Marco got Sidwell on the phone and suggested about the outgrowth being worse than they stressed. The air in Port Charles, thick with the lingering scent of autumn rain, carried a new tension, one of political intrigue, legal machinations, and the raw, unfiltered fear of parents fighting for their children. The city, still reeling from Ned Quartermain's medical crisis, now found itself captivated by a different kind of battle, one waged not in a hospital ward but in the cold, unforgiving arena of the justice system. The fallout from a teenage quest for justice was about to ensnare everyone in its path, from the mayor's office to the most vulnerable hearts in the city. A promise broken, the courtroom betrayal. The Port Charles courthouse was a study in contrasts. For Rick Lansing, there was the quiet confidence of a deal well made. He entered the courtroom with the swagger of a man who had already won, having negotiated a simple misdemeanor plea for Rocco Falconeri, 6 months of community service, a slap on the wrist for a misguided but well-intentioned break-in. It was a victory he'd already mentally banked. For the Falconeri and Spencer families, however, the atmosphere was thick with a fragile hope. They were a united front in the face of adversity. Lulu Spencer, her face pale but determined, sat between her ex-husband, Dante, and her father, Sonny Corinthos. A few rows back, Laura Collins, the mayor, pushed aside the looming specter of her political debate to stand as a grandmother first. Even Britt Westbourne and Nathan West were present, their presence a silent acknowledgement of their shared history and concern for the boy. Rocco himself, trying to emulate the stoicism of the men in his family, allowed himself a small, relieved smile when he saw the assembled crowd. The support was a tangible force, a shield against the intimidating formality of the court. He caught Joe's eye from the gallery, and his friend gave him a tight, encouraging nod. "It's going to be okay," the gesture seemed to say. "We got this." The proceedings began routinely. But the moment Ada Justine Turner rose to speak, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Her voice, crisp and devoid of empathy, cut through Rick's prepared statements. "The people are withdrawing the previously discussed plea agreement, Your Honor," she announced, pausing for effect as a murmur rippled through the courtroom. New evidence has come to light that drastically alters the severity of the charges. She laid out the new allegations with surgical precision. This was no longer a simple case of trespassing. According to Professor Dalton, Rocco hadn't just broken in, he had engaged in the deliberate destruction of proprietary, years' worth of scientific research. Furthermore, she claimed the lab contained hazardous materials, and Rocco's reckless actions had potentially put the entire university campus at risk. Rick was on his feet in an instant, objecting, his face a mask of stunned fury. "Your Honor, this is a blatant ambush. The defense has had no time to review these spurious, last-minute claims." The judge, unmoved, denied his request for a postponement. "You'll have ample time to prepare for trial, Mr. Lansing. Bail hearing is set for 48 hours from now. The defendant is remanded into custody until that time." The gavel fell with a sound like a gunshot. Remanded into custody. The words echoed, sucking the air from the room. "No. You can't. I didn't touch anything." Rocco's voice broke, the terrified cry of a child masquerading as a man. The brave facade crumbled as two bailiffs moved to handcuff him. Lulu let out a choked sob, leaning into Dante. Sonny's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting from a panicked Rocco to a smug-looking Professor Dalton, and then to Ada Turner, his eyes promising a silent, future reckoning. Laura Collins watched, her heart shattering, as her grandson was led away in chains. This wasn't justice, it was a targeted hit. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that Dalton had never mentioned any destroyed data during their confrontation. This was a frame-up, a political play that used her grandson as a pawn. The mayor's composure, so carefully cultivated, began to crack under the weight of a grandmother's fury. As the family staggered out of the courtroom, hollowed out by the sudden reversal, Marco Rios made a quiet phone call. "It's worse than we feared," he murmured into the receiver, a cryptic statement that hinted at deeper, darker currents swirling beneath the surface of the case. The weight of guilt, a son's confession. The aftermath of the arraignment left scars across the city. For Giovanni Palmieri, the guilt was a physical weight, crushing and inescapable. He had been the one to plant the seed of suspicion about Dalton. He had been part of the group that decided to take action. And now, Rocco, the one who had bravely taken the fall to protect his friends, was facing prison while Gio walked free. He found his birth mother, Brooke Lynn Quartermain, at the Quartermain mansion, still carrying the stress of her father's condition. The grand house felt cavernous and lonely. "Brooke Lynn," he began, his voice unsteady. "I need to tell you something. About Rocco." He unburdened himself, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anguish. He explained how the whole mess started, how he'd heard rumors about Dalton's lab, and how he, Emma, Danny, and Charlotte had concocted the plan. "He only went in there because of me. He's taking the blame for all of us. I can't let him do that. I have to go to the police. I have to confess." Brooke Lynn listened, her initial shock giving way to a fierce, protective ache. Here was her son, a boy she was still getting to know, shouldering a burden no teenager should ever have to carry. She saw the noble heart of his father, the late Leo Quartermain, reflected in Joe's tormented eyes. "Gio, no," she said firmly, pulling him into a hug. "You can't. Throwing yourself into that fire doesn't put Rocco's out. It just burns you both. This feels bigger than you. What happened in that courtroom today wasn't about a break-in. It was a setup. We need to be smart, not just noble." But Joe's confession to his mother was only half the story. Earlier, he had stood with Emma Scorpio Drake, their shared guilt creating a fragile, intimate bond. "I can't live with this, Emma," he had confessed to her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I'm going to tell Lulu and Dante everything. I'll leave you out of it." Emma, ever the steadfast partner, would have none of it. Her compassion was matched only by her own sense of responsibility. "No. Absolutely not. We did this together, Gio. If you confess, I confess. We face this together." she reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her touch was an anchor in his storm of self-recrimination. A small, grateful smile touched his lips. In that moment, their relationship deepened, forged in the fires of shared adversity. A doctor's wrath and a political meltdown. The hospital, usually a place of healing, became the stage for a different kind of confrontation. Emma, seeking a moment of quiet respite after the emotional turmoil of the courthouse, was cornered by a furious Britt Westbourne. "You," Britt seethed, her voice low and dangerous as she grabbed Emma's arm, her grip surprisingly strong for a doctor. "Let go of me," Emma demanded, trying to pull away. "Not until we get a few things straight," Britt shot back, her eyes blazing. "This little crusade of yours, this noble mission to save the animals, look what you've done. Rocco is facing prison because you couldn't leave well enough alone. You used the key fob you stole from my purse, you dragged my name into this, and now that boy's future is on the line. Your self-righteousness could ruin his life." Britt's anger was a volatile mix of genuine concern for Rocco and a fierce, protective instinct over her own tenuous position at the hospital. The incident was a stark reminder of her own vulnerabilities, and she was taking it out on the most accessible target. Meanwhile, the political storm broke. As Laura Collins exited the courthouse, she was immediately engulfed by a swarm of reporters and flashing cameras. Microphones were thrust in her face, their questions a cacophony of insinuation and drama-seeking. "Mayor Collins, is it true your grandson destroyed university property? Does this reflect on your ability to lead, given your family's connections? What's your response to Professor Dalton's claims?" Laura's composure, the carefully constructed facade of the calm, capable mayor, finally shattered. The image of Rocco in handcuffs, the smug look on Dalton's face, and Ezra Boyle's looming presence in the back of the crowd, proved too much. Her maternal instincts overrode her political ones. She stopped, turning to face the cameras directly, her gaze locking not on the reporters, but on Professor Dalton, who was watching the scene with a satisfied smirk. "My response?" Laura's voice, usually so measured, was sharp and loud, ringing with a raw, untamed fury. "My response is that this man is a liar." The media scrum erupted. Cameras clicked frenetically. This was the soundbite they had been waiting for. "He has fabricated these charges out of whole cloth for his own malicious, political purposes. He is using my grandson as a pawn in a disgusting game, and I will not stand for it." The words were a declaration of war, a mother's lioness roar that risked incinerating her entire political career. In that moment, she wasn't the mayor, she was a grandmother, publicly eviscerating a man she believed was trying to destroy her family. Desperate alliances and dangerous propositions. With Rocco's fate hanging in the balance, desperate measures began to take shape. Lulu Spencer, her mind racing with visions of her son in a prison cell, turned to the one person she knew who operated outside the confines of the law, Carly Spencer. She found Carly at Kelly's, still simmering from her own confrontation with Jocelyn about Lucas's decision to move in with Marco. "Carly, I need your help," Lulu pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's Rocco. This plea deal fell apart. They're charging him with felonies. He could go to prison. You know how to get things done. You have resources. Please." Carly, ever a mother herself, saw the sheer terror in Lulu's eyes. It was a look she recognized, a primal fear that transcended their complicated history. "Lulu, take a breath. Rick is a good lawyer. The law isn't enough here." Lulu insisted. "This is a setup. We need something else. We need leverage. I'm begging you." Simultaneously, in the more refined but no less cutthroat world of law, another proposition was being made. Alexis Davis, reeling from Drew's heavy-handed attempt to install Martin as her co-counsel on Willow's case, was approached by a ghost from her past, Rick Lansing. He found her in her office, surrounded by legal briefs for Willow's defense. "Tough day?" he asked, his tone deceptively light. "You could say that," Alexis replied, her guard instantly up. Rick Lansing and trouble were synonymous in her mind. "I saw what happened in court today. "They're railroading that boy," Rick stated, leaning against her doorframe. "Just like they're setting up your client, Willow. The system is rigged, Alexis. They're both being played by people with more power and fewer scruples." He paused, letting the observation hang in the air. "You're fighting a dragon with a butter knife." "So am I." Then he delivered his line, his eyes holding hers. "Maybe you and I should do the same." The offer was stunning in its implication. Join forces. Pool their resources, their knowledge, and their respective talents. It was a risky, morally ambiguous path. But as Alexis looked at Rick, remembering the hostage crisis that had proven he still had a core of decency, and considered the overwhelming forces arrayed against both their clients, she found herself, for the first time in a long time, seriously questioning her strict adherence to the rules. In a war, sometimes you needed a soldier who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The personal amidst the political. While the city was consumed by the falconry case, other lives continued their complex dances. In Portia Robinson's office, a tentative hope flickered. Curtis Ashford, after a pointed talk with his aunt, Stella, had come to see her. "Stella thinks, well, she made me think," Curtis began, choosing his words carefully. "About the baby. About us." Portia looked at him, her heart in her throat. "What are you saying, Curtis? Are you suggesting we stay together for the baby?" It was a question laden with both hope and despair, a desire for her family to be whole, but a fear of it being built on a foundation of obligation rather than love. Across town, the tension between Carly and Jocelyn over Lucas's choices reached a boiling point. After Lucas left Bobby's, hurt by Carly's lack of support, Carly turned her frustration on her daughter. "I have never been so disappointed in you, Jocelyn," Carly seethed. "You, of all people, know what Jen Sidwell is capable of. You know the danger he represents. And you're defending this insanity of Lucas moving into that snake's nest at Windmere?" Jocelyn, standing her ground, fired back, "It's his life, Mom. He's an adult. You can't control everyone. Your way isn't the only way." The argument highlighted a fundamental shift, a chasm between a mother who had survived by controlling her environment and a daughter who believed in the right to make one's own mistakes. As Monday, November 17, 2025, dawned on Port Charles, the city stood at a precipice. A mayor's career was in jeopardy after a very public meltdown. A young musician was tormented by a guilt that threatened to consume him. A doctor's rage and a lawyer's risky proposition signaled that the established rules of engagement were being abandoned. And in a jail cell, a terrified teenager waited, his fate now a tangled web that connected the city's most powerful families to its most shadowy underworlds. The battle for Rocco falconry was no longer just a legal matter, it was the spark that threatened to set all of Port Charles ablaze.